This new season that you're stepping into, the old paths won't work anymore. The old way of doing things won't work anymore. God is doing a new thing in his people. God bless you, and thank you for tuning in. For those that don't know, my name is Kevin Green. Come to you from a small town in northwest Georgia, here to share the message that God has laid upon my heart. God's people are being taken to a new level. They're being taken to a deeper walk, to a deeper understanding, to hear his voice clearer than we've ever heard it before. The old ways of hearing God will change. The old paths that you used to walk down, you'll no longer walk down anymore. The way that you see God move in this next season will be different than you've ever seen him before. A new way, a new path, a new understanding, and a new way of hearing his voice. As I was meditating upon the Lord today, and in Scripture, the Lord was dealing with me in a situation that I'm currently going through. God had moved me and my wife and my family from a small town in central Florida to a small town in northwest Georgia about 5 months ago. It was a step that was not easy to take. It was a step that rocked me to the very core. Me and my wife had a very successful business. We had a lot of things going for us in Florida at the time. We had a helps ministry that helped the community. We were a part of a local church and connected with other churches in our town. Had strong roots and a strong connection. Knew a lot of people. Grew up in the area. Very familiar. I had been born and raised in Florida. My wife, she had moved around. Her family was in the military. So she moved around from place to place. So moving was easy for her. But see, I loved Florida. I loved everything about it. People were moving from all over the world to Florida, retiring there. I didn't want to leave. And God had showed me a dream about a month before we made the move. And he showed me a dream that took some time to understand. Took some discernment. Took some prayer. Took some seeking him on. And it was at a time when my business was not doing as well as it normally would. Ministry was kind of dying off for me and my wife. Doors were being closed, forcefully closed. Seemed like we could barely keep afloat. Everything that we were trying wasn't working. The old way of doing things just was not working anymore. And so I knew that there was a shift coming. I've been walking with the Lord for a little over 11 years now. And when you've walked with God for some time, you can feel when there's a shift coming. You can feel when the season's about to change, when the tide is turning. And I knew that God was doing something, because this business that we had was very successful. God showed me a dream to start it. God used other people around me to minister to me before I made that decision of starting that business. And so I know when God was speaking to me. But see, God had never really used me much in dreams before, maybe a handful of times in the whole 11 years that I've served him. And all of a sudden I became restless. I became weary. I became anxious. And was battling depression. Didn't know why, but it seemed like the enemy came in like a flood. And I thought it was the enemy. But I didn't realize I was actually wrestling with God. And so it took a few months for me to realize that God was trying to speak to me. Because in those couple of months, I was trying to keep my business afloat. I was trying to find another church that God could use me and my wife's ministry at. Was trying all these things that normally would work with no effort. They would work, and just every door just seemed to slam shut. And so it took some time. It took God crushing some of my pride. It took God crushing my will and conforming me to His will. And it took time. But then one day, I was tired of wrestling with it. I was tired of, fighting it. I was tired of trying to keep things afloat. And I just felt this resistance, this wall. I had told my wife, I just feel like I'm hitting this wall. No matter what I do, I'm hitting a wall. And I don't know if it's a God wall or not. And so I began to seek the Lord. Didn't really get an answer. But that night I had a dream. And it was a dream of my mother-in-law, who lives up here in Northwest Georgia. In the dream, we had woken up, me and my wife, in her spare bedroom. And I went out into the living room where she was sitting, and all of a sudden I just start crying. And I said, I feel like I failed. I feel like I failed as a husband. I feel like I failed as a father. I feel like I failed you because I haven't taken care of your daughter the way that I should in the past year. And she looked at me in that dream, and she says, don't worry about it. We'll make it work. We'll make all this work. Don't worry about it. And I didn't know what that meant. And so I wrestled with it. And then probably about a week later, I have another dream. And it was a dream similar, but me and my wife, we were getting in a vehicle, and it was a vehicle that we didn't have. And my wife, we were going to my mother-in-law's for dinner. She was making us dinner. And my wife, before we got in the vehicle, she said, I'm going to drive. And I said, really? You want to make that drive? It's like a 9-10 hour drive. You sure you're up for that? And she's like, yeah, I want to drive. And so she drove, and I start to get comfortable for the trip, for the long trip. And all of a sudden we're there. Like 20 to 30 minutes we're there. And it puzzled me. And I was like, how did we get here so quick? And I pondered that. And I discussed it with my wife. We still couldn't figure it out. But I knew God was trying to say something, because I had never dreamed of my mother-in-law. And so I tossed with it. I turned with it. And at the time, me and my wife were trying to purchase a property to eventually build a home. We had felt God was pulling us into buying a piece of land and getting a fifth wheel and eventually building a home. And so we were seeking that out. And we were about to put a contract on this property, and I just couldn't sleep about it. I just had this gut-wrenching feeling in me. And I told my wife, I said, I think we need to back out. I said, I just don't feel it. It doesn't feel right in my heart. It doesn't feel right in my spirit. And so we prayed about it. And my wife took my phone, and she starts texting the realtor. And so I said, before you send it, read it to me. And she reads it to me. And at that moment, I knew the will of God. And in that text, when she read it to me, she said that we had to sell everything that we had because we were moving in with my mother-in-law. And at that moment, I understood. I understood what God was trying to tell me. I understood what those dreams meant. And so I ended up calling my mother-in-law. My wife was going to talk to her. She got on the phone, and all of a sudden my wife goes blank. Nothing. And so I started talking. And I start crying. And I just tell her, I don't know what we're going to do. We're tired of being in Florida. And kept it very, very shallow, because my mother-in-law is not spiritual by any means. Then all of a sudden, she says the exact thing that she said in the dream. Word for word. And I felt God's presence. And I knew that was the will of God, because I was a little leery. So then it was time to get everything in order. At that point, we had already sold our business. We had already downsized, sold one of our vehicles, because I knew just all these doors were closing and the business wasn't doing anything. So we went ahead and sold it a few months prior. We had started downsizing because we thought we were moving into a fifth wheel. So we had started downsizing all of our stuff. We ended up selling our business. We had new business ideas that God had given us. So we thought that's the season that we were going into. So we were making the preparations beforehand, but nothing was working out. God was pulling every plug, shutting every door. And so we went home, we got prepared, and about 6 days later, a week later, we're moving to North Georgia. And God had us get rid of everything. Everything. Most of it we gave away. Some of it we sold to have a little bit of pocket money because at the time we had no money. God had us give our car to someone that needed it in our community. So we literally went up there with a week's worth of clothes. And that's it. Starting completely fresh. And so it caused a lot of anxiety with me. It caused a lot of grief. It caused a lot of hurt. A lot of questions that I had for God. But I knew God was speaking to me. I knew I had to do this. I knew above all things, like, if I don't do this, my world is already caving in. We're going to lose everything anyways. So what does it hurt? Let's see what God has. So we came up here and the Lord told us this would be a fresh start. We were going back to the beginning. And so we treated it as that. And we got jobs and got our kids in a new school up here. And then all of a sudden, one day I'm at my job. And the Lord speaks to me to leave that job. And a few weeks prior, he had spoken to my wife to leave her job. And so I was like, okay, Lord, what's the point of all this? You got us up here. We're still staying with my mother-in-law after 5 months. Like, we were saving up money to get another vehicle, to get a place. It threw me in a world of confusion. Then again, I was wrestling with God again. And a few weeks prior, my wife had told me, why don't you start making content, making videos? You could reach a lot of people. And it resonated a lot with me. I had customers when I had my business that would tell me that. If you had a podcast, I'd listen to you. If you made videos and content, you should do it. And people have been telling me that for about 2 years. And when my wife said it, that time, she's told me it many times before. I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I started making videos. I probably had made like 2 or 3 videos before I had left my job. And they weren't doing anything. Like anybody that starts making content doesn't do anything. I was kind of leery about it. And just wasn't getting the results. I'm used to working hard and you earn a good wage. But content's 100% different. 100% different. You put so much more time into it than you get back. But I knew it was ministry. And I knew that as long as I reached one, then I did my calling. I did my duty. So I started doing it. Then after a couple of videos, God has me leave my job. And didn't understand it. Didn't understand it whatsoever. It was like God was speaking to me in a new way. Just didn't understand it at all. And so the day that the Lord had told me that, it was this weird gut-wrenching feeling. I had loved my job. I was very comfortable and cozy at my job. I was good at my job. And was actually about to move up. And that day I was going to find out if I had gotten a promotion or not. And I didn't. A guy that had been there a little bit longer than me, they gave it to him. And so I was upset. I was hurt. I was angry. Because it paid quite a bit more money, had more benefits. And we needed all that we could get at that moment. And so I was angry. I was upset. And I heard in my spirit, it's time for you to leave. But I thought it was me. Thought it was my emotions, because I was already upset. I didn't understand it. And so I called my wife. And I told her, the news. I didn't get it. And she was encouraging me. And being there for me. And then I told her, I said, I want to leave. And I said, I think God's telling me that I needed to leave. But I'm not sure. And so we got off the phone. She started praying about it. I called her back a few minutes later. We had both prayed about it. And my wife is very sensitive to God's voice. Very sensitive to God's spirit. And I knew she had an answer, but she wouldn't tell me. she kept telling me, you got to seek this out. You got to hear the Lord in this. And I was like, well, I want to leave, but I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. And she's like, just block out all the noise. Just start praying and ask God to speak to you. And so I got off the phone and I did. And God told me to go. I came up with a game plan to leave. And I called her back on the phone and she's like, so, did you hear from the Lord? And I told her, I said, yeah, I want to leave. And I said, but, what are we going to do? Because you're not working now. Now I'm working. I needed this promotion. And then all of a sudden my emotions came back and flooded me like a storm again. And then I started doubting again. And so I did this for probably about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden my feet take off before my mouth, my body can catch up. And I'm leaving. I'm walking out. And at that moment I felt so much peace. And I knew I was under an attack because when I had looked down at my phone, there was a video that popped up of somebody that I'm subscribed to on YouTube. And it says, you're under attack. Tell Satan to get behind you. And I knew it was speaking to me. And I did. And that's why I decided to walk out. My feet just took off before my body could. And so for the past month and a half, I've continued to make videos. I've continued to, do what God's called me to do. Tried to seek out jobs. I tried to do things that I'm used to. Things that I've worked since I was 14 years old. Only been without a job for a few weeks since I was 14. So I'm a worker. I'm used to working. I'm not used to just sitting around doing nothing, searching for jobs. I've never had a problem finding a job. Every time that I've applied, went in for an interview, gotten hired on the spot since I was 14. Never had an issue. And so immediately after that job, for about a week, I start praying. I'm like, God, I know that you're doing this for a reason. There's obviously a reason to this. And, I thought it was the job. I thought it was this, thought it was that. And never really got an answer from God. But I knew I was right where God wanted me. And so I was like, God, what am I going to do, for money? What am I going to do for this? And God reminded me of, hey, you haven't filed your taxes for last year. And I was like, okay. So I went ahead and filed them. And waited, didn't get anything back, didn't hear anything. And then we ended up filing for this year. And so, we had a whole game plan that we were going to use that money to get us a vehicle and, get us a place to rent. And so we started seeking out places and seeking out, where to rent around here. I knew what God had showed me in the dream meant something, that we didn't live right in this town. We lived, within 30 minutes away, 20, 30, 45 minutes away. And there's another town about 35, 40 minutes away from us that we love, where all the shops are, where, there's malls. It's just what we were used to in Florida. Very accessible, very close to wherever we want to go. And where we're at now, it's just, there's not much. There's a Walmart in town, some gas stations, corner stores. There ain't much. And so we already have to drive 30, 45 minutes to go into town to do any kind of shopping, anything. And so one day, me and my wife, we decided to go look at this place that we're going to rent, start getting everything in order for when, our money, the taxes come through, so that we can have everything in order with a vehicle, with a place. That way it's a smooth transition. And so we find this house on Facebook Marketplace that they're renting. And I felt in my heart, I told my wife, I said, we're not working right now, but I trust God. And I know He wants us to have us a place. I could feel it. And so I said, I'm going to go out on a limb on this. I'm going to go out on faith. And so we ended up getting a hold of the lady, and we met up with her on a Sunday afternoon. And as we're going into town, me and my wife and my kids just become so overcome with the Holy Ghost. So overcome with joy and peace. And we're still 5 minutes away from this house. And we're just, all of a sudden, all of us are overcome. And we knew God was doing something. And we knew this is more than a house. And so we go there, and God would not lift at all. We left there, felt the same amount of joy and love and just God's Spirit all over us. And when we started coming back into our town, it all lifts. So I immediately thought, that must be it. That must be the place we're supposed to rent. Why would God do that? I heard in the Spirit February 1st. And so we made a commitment with this lady that, we'll be ready to sign the lease on the 1st. And so we start getting everything ready, getting everything prepped. And the 1st rolls around, and I don't hear from the lady, the owner of the home. And I'm just like, okay, this is weird. Because God has shown me a dream probably a week before. And I was standing with my mother-in-law in her house, and all of a sudden I just grab her by the shoulders and I tell her, we're signing the lease on the 1st. Don't worry, we're signing the lease on the 1st. But I knew in the Spirit God was telling me, you're signing the lease on the 1st. He didn't say February 1st. He just said the 1st. And so I that just strengthened me in what I felt, because I was kind of doubting it. And so the 1st rolls around and there's just nothing. We don't hear from her, no anything. Then all of a sudden, like 3-4 o'clock, get a message from her. We had gotten a snowstorm. And so she was like, we can't meet today. The snow hasn't let up. And we can meet anytime this week. Just let me know. And so I give her a day. I asked her if, Tuesday would work. And Tuesday rolls around. I wake up early in the morning. Like 5 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday morning. And I just feel anxious. I feel just yucky. I mean, just like my spirit was warning me. My spirit was just everything about me felt wrong. Anxious, depressed, just all these emotions are flooding me for no reason. It should be a happy day. We're moving into a place. Just the complete opposite of what I expected. So I start seeking it out with the Lord, and me and my wife prayed about it, and I came to the conclusion. I said, I'm not going to look like a fool. We have no money. We have to come up with X amount of dollars that we don't have. And I don't think this is God. I don't know why God showed me what he showed me. And I ended up messaging her probably about 3 or 4 hours before we're supposed to meet up. And I told her, you're probably going to have to wait till March 1st. And I told her the situation, that we were still waiting on our taxes to come back. And very transparent with her the whole time. And then all of a sudden she gets angry with me. And then a few hours later, she ends up putting the house back on Marketplace, back online. And I looked at my wife and I said, well, I guess we know God's will. That wasn't the place. But what didn't make sense to me was, after we had went to look at that house, we had went back into that same town 2 different occasions, just to feel it out, just to see if it was still God, just to make sure that we weren't off. And every time we went about 10 minutes away from that home, once we started getting closer to this home we're going to rent, we just get overcome more than the last time. And so I told my wife, I said, I don't understand this. We're feeling all this and everything. And, fast forward to that Tuesday, we're supposed to meet her. And I'm like, why would God do all that? Why did we feel so overcome? We felt so much peace, so much joy. Felt like we were on a cloud when we first went there. 2 times after we went there, we just felt overcome. Just didn't understand it. But I knew there was something bigger than just a house. And I remember saying that this is bigger than a home. And we're still in the waiting process. That's about where we're at right now, is, still trying to find a place, still trying to seek out the Lord, what he wants. And then last night, I go to bed, I'm just, feeling a little anxious, little ornery, a little upset, because I'm like, here it's been a month and a half, almost 2 months that I haven't worked, and really haven't heard anything from God, any clear direction, anything. Just been making content, making videos, and, trying to push through, not really making much leadway, not really feeling like I'm making an impact, but just keep doing it. And that's the last thing I knew God told me, so that's what I'm going to stick with. And so that's what I was doing. And that's what I'm still doing. So in all this, God's just been speaking to me differently. See, God would show me things. He would speak to me through other people, my kids, my family, dreams and visions. And we always had a clear direction. And for about the past year and a half, it's been really hard to hear God. And not that it's been hard, it's that God has made it a little bit more difficult for me to hear him. But when I hear him, it's clear. There's no denying it. It's completely clear as day. Where before, there were times that I thought it was God and I miss it, and I'd jump out on a limb and then realize, oh, that ain't God. Have to close that door and walk through another door, and had to go through a couple of doors till I found God. But what God's doing now is he's making sure you go through the right door. He's making sure you make the right decision. And he's bringing you to a deeper level of understanding. And that's what he's been doing with me for about the past year and a half, is the things that used to work, the faith that I used to have, the decisions I used to make, they're surface level to where God's taken me now. The old ways don't work anymore. My old way of thinking, my old faith doesn't work anymore. Everything now is deeper. I have to have more faith. I have to have more trust. I have to have more hope. I have to have more understanding, a more clear direction. And it's maturity. And it makes us uncomfortable. It makes us feel out of place. It makes us feel like we're not doing something right. And what we've gone through in the past year and a half, me and my family, we've went through 2 other times. And so we knew this would be an easy process. Yeah, it sucks, but we'll bounce back like we did before. And so we just kept trying the same things that we were doing in the past, because, God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He took care of us then. This old way worked, but the old ways weren't working anymore. Nothing that we were doing that worked in the past was working now. Everything was different. It's like our world had turned upside down. And I had thought I was out of the will of God. I had thought, God had left me. I had tossed and turned with the Lord, wrestled with God on all this, like begged God to speak to me. Just none of it made any sense the past year and a half. And I really thought I'd backslid and gotten away from God. My relationship didn't change, but the way I felt changed, the way I heard him changed, and it was so much harder to get God to speak to me clearly. But see, how he used to speak to me before was through people, through my wife, through my circumstances, sometimes in reading the word. Sometimes he speaks to me directly in prayer. But everything I do now requires more prayer, requires more devotion time in my word, requires more of an understanding, requires more patience and more time, and truly waiting and knowing in my heart and in my spirit, this is the right move, this is the right decision, this is the right thing. Because everything in my life has always been fast-paced, and God has slowed me down, so that way I can hear him clearly. And I'm starting to learn a new side of God that I've never experienced. And that's where God's taken his people to new grounds, a new level, a new depth, and a new understanding. And I'm reminded of Moses. In Exodus 17, the children of God, they had just escaped Egypt. They're in the wilderness. They're all thirsty. And they were all coming against Moses and Aaron. And Moses looked up to heaven, talked to the Lord, and said, what am I going to do? They're all coming against me. And the Lord told him to take his staff and to strike the rock, and water would come out of it. And so he obeyed the Lord, and water came out. And so 40 years later, they're in that same predicament. They're in the wilderness. And in Numbers 20, this time he tells him to speak to the rock, not to strike it, to speak to it. And Moses was angry with the people because they had 40 years of murmuring, 40 years of doubt, 40 years of just trouble. And here, 40 years later, he's in the same predicament. They're all murmuring. They're all coming against him and Aaron. But God tells him this time to speak to the rock, not to strike it, to speak to it. So instead, he strikes the rock twice, disobeying God. And because of his disobedience, Moses never saw the promised land. Moses was created to free God's people and take them into the promised land. But for 40 years, all they did was doubt, made a statue to serve false gods. But yet, God put the same predicament, the same problem in front of Moses, Aaron, and his people. But the old way didn't work. God told him to do it a new way. Don't strike it. Speak to it. And Moses disobeyed. And because of his disobedience, he missed out on the promise. Do not let disobedience in this season keep you from the promises that you know that you have in Christ. From the promises that God has shown you of your future. Learn to listen. Learn to be patient. Learn to wait. Learn to hear God clearly before you move. Learn to really pray about every decision, every move, and everything you do before you do it, not after. See, because the first time, God had a lot more patience with Moses, with his people. But the second time, God expected more of Moses because he was supposed to be more mature. He was supposed to be at a new level. He was supposed to be to a deeper understanding. I mean, God had been with them 40 years. They had a cloud by day, a fire by night. Their clothes never withered. They had fresh manna from heaven. They had God's blessings every single day. But God told him to do it differently this time. The old way did not work anymore. So this season that God's people are stepping into, this new door that God has set before you, the old way and the old path will not work anymore. This is a new door, a new season, a new level of maturity, and a new level of obedience. This hour, we need to trust God and hear God more clearly than ever. This is a part of maturity. God doesn't keep us where we're at. He doesn't keep us in the state that we're in. We go from glory to glory. We go from strength to strength. Do not miss out on the promises of God because of your disobedience. Because some doors that God puts in front of you, if you miss it, you may never walk through those doors again. So thanks for stopping by, guys. Hope this blessed you. Hope it encouraged you. Hope it gave you some direction. Hope it answered some questions that you've been toiling with the Lord and in your heart. If you could, like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video so it can bless and encourage somebody else, and we'll see you on the next one.